My name's Hannah, a girl with olive skin, which was a stark contrast to my stunning sea-colored eyes. You might not believe it, but I was known as Blue Eyes around our neighborhood. I was born into a fairly large family, with 2 sisters and 3 brothers. One of my sisters, Marie, who was 2 years older than me and studying medicine, was married and lived in Paris. My brothers were older and well-educated. The eldest lived in Germany with his wife, while Aiden and Nova lived close by in our neighborhood. Aiden was a vet, and Nova had studied pharmacy and owned a pharmacy. Both were doing well financially, living independently. I lost my mom when I was just 9, and my dad played both parental roles for me. I was very attached to him and loved him dearly, but it seemed like life was always challenging me. Tragically, I lost him to lung cancer right after I finished high school. My dad's death put me under immense mental and emotional strain, landing me in the hospital for 10 days. After his funeral, my brother Nova insisted that Marie and I shouldn't live alone. So, they rented out our father's house, and we reluctantly moved into Nova's place. He had a duplex with 4 bedrooms and a small suite in the corner of the yard, which he made available for Marie and me for some privacy. That year, due to my mental state, I couldn't go to college, but my brother-in-law's sister had gotten into nursing in our town. His family, due to his father's work, had been living in Paris for several years, and his brother Jack was supposed to come stay with his sister. Jack was 3 years older than me but looked much older due to his burly physique. I didn't really like him and tried to avoid interacting with him as much as possible. Jack seemed to understand this and always threw in a sarcastic comment whenever he saw me. It was autumn, and I had been visiting my parents' graves. On my way back home, Marie called to say our aunt wasn't feeling well, and she was going to stay with her that night. She asked if I was scared to be alone, but I said no and headed home. When I got there, Jack and my sister-in-law Emily were in the yard. Without looking at Jack, I greeted Emily and hugged and kissed my niece, Mia. Emily asked about Marie, and I told her our aunt was unwell, so Marie was staying with her overnight. Despite Emily's insistence, I refused to join them for dinner. That night, I made myself an omelet and turned off the lights at midnight to sleep. I'm not sure how long I was asleep, but I woke up to the sensation of warm breath on my face. I couldn't see well, so I rubbed my eyes, hoping to make out who it was in the darkness. Suddenly, I felt my face get wet from saliva, and something licked my face. I screamed, jumped out of bed, and ran towards the door, but I stumbled over the bedside table, writhing in pain. Somehow, I managed to find the switch and turned on the light, only to see Jack's dog, Tommy, sitting by my bed. Annoyed, I cursed Jack and Marie for not being home, even though I was actually fond of Tommy and he often came to me, showing affection. But after being startled like this a few times, I had told Jack to keep him tied up at night. It was puzzling that Tommy was loose, especially since I was alone that night, and even more so because I had closed the window and door of my room, although not locked, but definitely closed. So, how did Tommy get in? I suspected Jack was behind this but had no proof, which frustrated me even more. The next morning, after taking Tommy outside, I was heading back to my room when Jack greeted me. Disliking him, I barely responded. Jack approached and remarked, "This isn't a playground, it's a home with respect." Angrily, I told him it was unnecessary for him to remind me where I was and warned him not to leave his dog untied at night again. Jack asked what happened, and I explained how Tommy had come into my room at night and scared me. Jack smirked and said, "In the summer, you said he came in through the window, but now that the window was closed, how did he get in?" I retorted that he should answer that. Jack joked, "How should I know? You took my dog without permission, and now you're complaining?" and left laughing. His behavior was infuriating, always seeming to enjoy putting me down. At that time, I had no feelings for Jack and just wished he would leave soon. As time passed, I grew increasingly restless with idleness at home. Encouraged by my brother and Marie, I enrolled in university and also joined a DAF, a type of Persian drum, class. I had always been passionate about the DAF and quickly excelled, so much so that my instructor recommended me to a music group for collaboration. I remember the first day I was added to their online group, I wasn't warmly welcomed as they probably thought I was there through connections. But after some time working with them, they realized I was genuinely talented. On the group manager's suggestion, I started taking santur, a type of Persian dulcimer, lessons, marking the beginning of a new set of challenges for me. I needed to buy a good santur, and I suggested to my brother that we go shopping for one together. Emily, when she heard about it, mentioned that Jack's friend in Paris was in the business and could order one for me. That evening, while I was playing in the yard with Tommy and Mia, Jack returned from university. Emily told Jack about the santur purchase. Jack turned to me and suggested we go together the next day to his friend's store to pick out a good santur. I declined, asking him to choose one on his behalf. Jack seemed upset and agreed reluctantly. The next day, when I inquired about the santur, he admitted he had forgotten. I was infuriated by his carelessness and raised my voice, pointing out I had reminded him multiple times. Jack defensively asked why I was yelling, suggesting it couldn't have been that important if he forgot, questioning what the big deal was. I angrily retorted that I would manage on my own. Jack just shrugged and walked away. In that moment, I called David, a fellow music class student, and asked if he knew where I could find a santur. David gave me the address of a shop in the market, mentioning that if they didn't have one, the owner knew many contacts who could help. In a bid to spite Jack, I skipped my university prep class that day and headed to the address David provided, wishing I hadn't in hindsight. The young shop assistant informed me that his boss wasn't there and they didn't sell Santos, but he knew someone named Ahmad who did. Following the assistant's directions, I found Ahmad's shop, which was quite remote from the market. The entrance involved descending some steps, and as I opened the door, a bell rang, revealing an interior that resembled a thrift store filled with various items. Absorbed in my surroundings, I was brought back to reality by a voice from the back of the shop. Approaching, I greeted the man, who turned out to be Ahmad, a stocky man in his late 30s with a rugged appearance. The moment he saw me, he said, "Yes, dear, what can I do for you?" I said I wanted a santur, and he chuckled, saying, "From chicken soup to human life, you can find everything in my shop." Then he pointed me to a corner of the shop to look at the santur. As Ahmad walked away, I was still skeptical but thought I'd take a quick look and leave. The room was filled with instruments, some quite luxurious and expensive. Suddenly, my eyes landed on two santur that caught my attention, especially one with traditional designs. I was admiring it when I heard footsteps and turned to see Ahmad entering. I really didn't want to be alone with him. He asked which one caught my eye, and I pointed to the one I liked, saying I'd take it if it wasn't too expensive. Ahmad said, "If you play your cards right, price won't be an issue." His comment shocked me, and I asked seriously, "What do you mean?" He leaned in and said, "Stick with me, and you'll be satisfied." I was terrified, feeling a sense of danger, and told him to watch his mouth, saying I was no longer interested. When I tried to walk past him, he grabbed my wrist and said, "Where do you think you're going in such a hurry? I'm not done with you." If you have liked the video so far, please like it and make sure to hit the subscribe button so that we can hear the rest of this exciting and fascinating story together. Don't forget to stay with us until the end at the end of the video. You will be surprised, so stay with me. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. Furious, I yelled, "Let go of me, you jerk." Ahmad laughed and said, "I'll let you go when it's time." The more I struggled, the less it seemed to help. I started screaming and cursing, and he covered my mouth. I bit his hand, and he slapped me hard. The blow was so severe that I stumbled into the wall, losing my balance and feeling half my strength drain away. My vision blurred, I wasn't unconscious but couldn't move, and Ahmad, with his filthy hands, dragged me to a corner of the room where a single bed was placed. I can't even say it, it makes me sick. Just know that no matter how much I begged, he wouldn't listen and did what he wanted. I struggled and screamed so much that I had nothing left. I was trapped in Ahmad's shop for about 3 hours and was assaulted twice. The second time he hurt me, I screamed in pain until a hard blow to my head knocked me unconscious. I don't know how long I was out, but when I opened my eyes, it was nearly noon, and I was lying next to an unfinished building with hardly any foot traffic. My entire body ached, and my throat felt raw, as if wounded. All I could do in that moment was cry. I spent about half an hour just sobbing there. My mind was numb. After that half hour, I got up. My clothes were all dusty, but it didn't matter to me. I could barely walk, and worse, I was unfamiliar with the neighborhood. But I started walking and eventually reached a busy street where I hailed a cab. Once inside, I started crying again. I felt terrible. The taxi driver glanced at me but didn't say anything. When I got out in front of my house, I fumbled for my keys, opened the door, and prayed no one would be in the yard. But my luck, Jack and Mia were playing with Tommy in the yard. I tried to ignore them, but Mia saw me and yelled, "Auntie," running towards me. I had to stop and hug her. Jack came over and said, "You look tired." I didn't want to make eye contact, so I turned my head towards Mia and didn't respond, even when he remarked about my inability to greet properly. I just kept quiet and headed towards our suite. Jack then said, "Are you sure you were at class looking all dusty? You look more like someone who's just come from a construction site." Despite the reason for my dusty clothes, I just went straight to the shower, the only place I could cry out loud. That night, Emily kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't give her a straight answer and spent the night twisting in pain. For days, I was in pain and couldn't talk to anyone about what had happened to me. I couldn't let go of what Ahmad did, but I felt powerless and was afraid to tell the truth, fearing the shame it would bring. I became irritable and depressed, flying off the handle at the slightest provocation. About 45 days after the incident, Jack got me a saunteur from his friend. Although I no longer had the enthusiasm for classes, I attended to maintain appearances. Everyone seemed to notice I had changed. One day in class, I felt sick and initially thought it was just low blood pressure, but when it kept happening, I went to the doctor. The day I got my test results, the nurse congratulated me on my pregnancy. I nearly fainted. I couldn't believe it and left the lab crying, barely making it home, terrified of people's ordinary looks, fearing they might know. I was close with one of the students from the institute and called them, bursting into tears and begging to meet. When they came over, I spilled everything that had happened to me. They were in shock for a few minutes, couldn't believe it, and kept asking why I hadn't told anyone at the time. Now they wanted to know what I planned to do. I begged for their help. They suggested I find a doctor to get rid of the baby. I asked them to look around for a doctor for me. It took about a week, but they finally found an OBGYN. On the day we went to the doctor, my blood pressure was so low they had to put me on N4, but I was so stressed that my blood pressure wouldn't rise. The OBGYN refused to take the risk, saying I could bleed out with my low blood pressure. I went 3 times, and each time the same thing happened. It seemed like it wasn't meant to be for me to terminate the pregnancy. My condition worsened day by day, and Marie noticed something was off. No matter how much she asked, I couldn't give her a straight answer. One night, as I sat in the yard lost in thought, Emily came over and mentioned how restless I'd been and that Jack was really worried about me. I was surprised to hear Jack's name. She said he had suggested several times that she talk to me about the future, but she knew I wouldn't make any decisions until Marie was married. I wanted to cry out loud at that moment. Who could I share my pain with? I had always had a teasing relationship with Jack, throwing snide remarks at each other, but I knew deep down he was a reliable man. One day, frustrated and agitated, I was lying down when my friend called and suggested I report Ahmad. I said it was too late. How could I prove the assault? They convinced me not to be afraid, that the law would support me. Their words made me impulsively decide to confront Ahmad. In the late afternoon, around 4, I headed to Ahmad's shop. Entering the shop, the bell's ring made Ahmad aware of my presence, and he loudly welcomed me. When I faced him, his eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly composed himself, pretending not to recognize me. Disgusted by his audacity, I challenged him, saying, "Don't you recognize me, or are you pretending to be dumb?" He feigned ignorance. I couldn't believe I had mustered the courage to confront Ahmad. Raising my voice, I said, "Interesting, you don't remember me? No problem, I'll refresh your memory through the law. It might be a bit late, but I'm going to file a complaint against you." When I threatened to report him, Ahmad just laughed it off and said, "Do whatever you want. How are you going to prove it was me when I'm seeing you for the first time? Go find someone else to pin it on." It was clear Ahmad wouldn't easily admit to anything, but I had a trump card. I told him, "Don't think you're so clever. Unfortunately, I got pregnant from you, and there's no denying that. The tests will prove it, even if you claim it was consensual. You'll have to own up to your mistake." Ahmad's face was a picture when I said that. He slammed his fists on the table and accused me of lying, saying I was as bad as a stray dog. Seeing his reaction, a part of me felt a twisted satisfaction. I told him proving it would be easy and that I'd be back with the police. I left the shop without looking back, walking so fast I was out of breath by the time I got home. After calming down, I called my friend to tell them I'd confronted Ahmad. They were shocked at first but believed me when I swore on my father's grave. They called me crazy, saying Ahmad could have heard me, and insisted I report him. But I was torn. The next morning, I skipped the first 2 hours of my class. When I left my house and got a bit away, I felt like someone was following me. Turning around on the main road, I saw Ahmad in his car following me. I stopped, and when he saw me, he told me to get in, claiming he had something to discuss. I told him I wasn't crazy enough to get into his car. He mocked me for showing up at his shop the day before and called me a fool. I told him to park a bit further down the road where we could talk. When I got to the park entrance where he was waiting, I sat down on a bench without paying him any attention. He sat beside me and urged me to speak. I repeated what I had said before, that I was going to the police station. Ahmad then asked how he could be sure the baby was his. I said a test would easily prove it. Ahmad got up, paced back and forth, and then shockingly offered to marry me if the baby was proven to be his. I was both amused and appalled by his proposal, telling him he was overconfident to be bargaining with me. I could ruin him with a complaint. As I stood up to leave, Ahmad blocked my way and said he knew nothing about me, not even my name. He admitted to following me home the previous day to find out where I lived. He claimed to have been drunk that day and had realized his mistake a few hours later. He had even gone back to where he had left me but couldn't find me. Out of fear, he had closed his shop for 2 weeks. When nothing came of it, he assumed I was just a homeless girl who wouldn't follow up. He said he was willing to do anything to make it right, calling me the girl with the blue eyes, admitting that my sea blue eyes had captivated him even then. I didn't really know how to respond to Ahmad, but his words didn't seem like lies. That day, I only told him my name and left, but that wasn't the last time I saw Ahmad. He started coming around my neighborhood almost daily, trying to talk to me whenever I stepped out. Only my friend knew about this situation and kept insisting I file a complaint against Ahmad. But when they saw how persistent Ahmad was, they did some digging and found out Ahmad came from a family of 8, wasn't struggling financially, but supported his mother and 2 sisters at home since their father had passed away years ago. My friend advised me to think carefully before making any decisions. I was in a tough spot, fearing the shame of my pregnancy becoming public and knowing that if I revealed it after so long, fingers would be pointed at me, questioning my silence, possibly not even believing my story. After much turmoil, I decided to tell Ahmad to formally propose to me. During this time, Jack seemed eager to talk to me, but I always found excuses to avoid him. It was a Tuesday when I informed Ahmad he could come for the proposal, and we planned for him to tell my brother he wanted the wedding to happen within a month. That night, my brother talked to me about Jack's interest in proposing and said they'd have no objections if I agreed, adding that Marie could make her own decisions about her life whenever she wanted. Despite Jack's better circumstances compared to Ahmad, the ordeal I had been through and the fear of losing my reputation made me falsely claim to my brother that I wasn't interested in Jack and that a friend's brother would soon propose to me, unaware of the dire future I was setting up for myself. My brother inquired how long I'd known this person and which friend he was related to. Ashamed, I mumbled that it was someone from the Music Institute whose brother I had seen a few times when he came to pick her up, seeming like a decent person to me. 2 days passed, and every time I saw Jack, he would just look at me. I knew Emily must have told him about the proposal situation. He seemed unable to believe I had refused him, even though under different circumstances, Jack would have been my first choice. Ahmad called to say he'd arranged for his sister to corroborate our story, and we set the proposal date for Friday. I informed Emily and my brother about the day. On the night of the proposal, Marie was more excited than I was to meet Ahmad, and I just wore something casual and sat, lost in thought about my uncertain future. I hadn't seen Jack since going upstairs. He had locked himself in his room. Emily had gone all out with the preparations, and around 9 p.m., we heard the doorbell. At the same time, Jack came down the stairs, sat on the couch without greeting anyone, and I went into the kitchen. Ahmad arrived with his mother, older brother, and 2 sisters, carrying a bouquet. His mother was a tall, sturdy woman with tattoos all over her arms, which was quite a shock to everyone, especially to Jack, who seemed stunned by my choice. After some time, I came in with tea and sat next to Marie. Ahmad's brother formally proposed on his behalf. My brother, not quite taken with them, asked for a few days to think it over. After Ahmad and his family left, Jack gave me a look and quietly remarked that he hadn't expected me to have such poor taste before heading upstairs. My brother, who had been holding back his disapproval, began to vent, questioning my decision and how I could be attracted to Ahmad, pointing out our age difference and how mismatched we were. No one understood my predicament or the pain I was carrying. That night, I told my brother that Ahmad was my choice, and if my opinion mattered to them, they'd have to accept it. For 3 days, Emily, Jack, Marie, and my brother tried to change my mind, but couldn't, and eventually gave in to my wishes. When I told Ahmad they had agreed, he was overjoyed. Preliminary talks were held, and we got engaged, planning to marry within a month and live in the upper floor of his mother's house, where 2 of Ahmad's other brothers also lived. For the engagement, they bought me a ring without asking for my preference. Ahmad's sister chose it based on her taste. Our engagement ceremony was a family affair with only our siblings present. From the day after our engagement, my brother and I started looking for my dowry. I was struggling as before, feeling weak even after a short walk, and my blood pressure kept dropping. I knew my poor health was due to my pregnancy, but Marie and Emily thought it was just wedding stress. My brothers spared no expense for me. They bought the best of everything I pointed at, and within 21 days, my dowry was complete. I had only visited Ahmad's house twice for about an hour each time, and it was always too chaotic to notice much. Whenever I suggested we see the upstairs, Ahmad would say he wanted to clean it up first to make a good impression. 10 days before the wedding, Ahmad announced that the upstairs, which had been mostly used for storage, was cleared out for renovation. I really didn't know much about Ahmad's family. When his mother called me to go shopping together, she insisted I come alone. I thought it would be just Ahmad and me, but his sister, brother's wife, and mother were all in the car. We went to buy wedding rings, and everyone had their own opinions, disregarding mine, and ended up choosing what his mother liked. The same happened when buying shoes and clothes. I conceded for the moment but decided not to let them interfere in the future. 3 days before the wedding, we were supposed to move my dowry to the house. I went to see the place myself. Ahmad had claimed it was 70 square meters, but it was actually a small living room, a tiny bedroom, a cramped kitchen, and a combined bathroom and toilet, barely renovated. I was distressed, thinking about what my family would say if they saw it. Ahmad hired some workers, and with the help of my brother and Jack, we managed to fit my dowry into that small space. Jack's surprised looks made it clear he couldn't believe I was going to live in such an old house with so many people. None of Ahmad's family helped or even offered congratulations. When we finished, Marie and I were about to lock the door when Ahmad's younger sister and mother came up, questioning us in a demanding tone about locking the door, saying they didn't have such rules, as if we were thieves or hiding something. I didn't want to argue so close to the wedding, so I handed over the keys and we left. I tried to stay calm so Marie wouldn't get more upset, but as we reached the end of the street, Marie insisted we go back. I knew she was making an excuse, and told her we had no choice but to keep quiet for now, promising to handle things once I was more independent. Marie was frustrated, saying Ahmad's family was not right for us, wondering what I saw in them, and wishing I hadn't agreed to live with them. I reassured Marie, saying I knew she was worried about me, but I hoped things would get better once I had some time to adjust. With just a few days left until the wedding, I was caught up in final preparations and hardly aware of anything else at home. The mood was subdued, especially with Jack, who seemed lost in thought whenever I saw him. On the wedding day, Ahmad picked me up and we went to the salon. I had chosen a wedding dress beforehand, and Ahmad's sister was supposed to ensure it wasn't rented out, but the dress they pulled out wasn't the one I had chosen. I called Ahmad in frustration, and he admitted his sister had forgotten to secure the dress, but urged me not to let it ruin the night. My dissatisfaction grew as the dress wasn't what I wanted, and I was upset by the comments and attitudes of Ahmad's mother and sister throughout the evening, feeling embarrassed in front of my family. After the ceremony, when Jack wished me happiness before leaving, I couldn't sleep at all. In the morning, feeling weak, I found the dowry arrangement changed and many of my groceries and meats missing. I waited for Ahmad to wake up to complain about his family's actions. Ahmad's response was dismissive, emphasizing that we were all one family and that whatever was taken was probably needed, offering to buy anything else I wanted but advised me not to make a fuss over such matters. My new sister-in-law, also feeling out of place, seemed like she wanted to tell me something but was hesitant. The day after the wedding, as guests arrived, I felt out of place, cautious not to wear anything too tight despite not showing much, fearing someone might notice my condition. Ahmad's mother welcomed the guests at our door, and Ahmad's sister, along with my sister-in-law, managed the gifts, writing down everything but not allowing anyone else to interfere. After the guests left, my mother-in-law stored all the gifts and money away, later handing me just a couple of coins and a small amount of cash, claiming she would make it up to me later, and took the rest for herself. I was shocked and couldn't hold back my words, telling her that whatever gifts and money had been brought for me should be mine to manage, and that her family should only take what was intended for them. Before I could finish, she erupted in anger, accusing me of being audacious enough to talk back, something she claimed no other bride in her experience had done. The noise attracted my brothers-in-law, who defended their mother, and interestingly, they all seemed to think I was at fault. My sister-in-law chastised me, suggesting I thought too highly of myself coming from a well-educated and affluent family, and said I should be ashamed. I was counting on Ahmad to defend me, but before he could come upstairs, his mother pulled him aside. When he finally came up, instead of supporting me, he scolded me for causing trouble, saying other brides had lived in their house without complaint. When I stood up for myself, mentioning the unauthorized taking of my groceries and now the wedding gifts, Ahmad struck me, warning me to watch my words. I retreated to the room, overwhelmed with tears, realizing the difficult days ahead. That night, Ahmad's sister came to take him for dinner, and no one checked on me. I spent my second wedding night alone, and the next morning, Ahmad went to have breakfast with his mother, leaving me in distress. Around 11, while lying down, my younger sister-in-law sneaked in to see me. Upon noticing the bruise on my forehead, she advised me to keep quiet for a peaceful life, not to challenge her mother and sisters. Surprised, I insisted I was merely standing up for my rights, but she shared her own experience of initially resisting the family's ways and hinted at a past filled with love and regret, suggesting I had fallen into the same trap with Ahmad. She advised me to stay silent and avoid further conflicts. Time passed since my marriage, and I had gotten to know everyone a bit better. Except for my young sister-in-law, everyone seemed to be against me, and Ahmad always sided with his family. My pregnancy cravings were becoming unbearable, and Ahmad's mother suspected I was pregnant due to my symptoms. She asked me a few times, but I brushed it off, claiming my period was just late. Since I wasn't visibly showing yet, she probably thought it was early in the pregnancy. Despite my poor health, it was my turn to clean the courtyard and stairs twice a week. One day, while cleaning, the smell of steak from my mother-in-law's cooking overwhelmed me. I went to the door, hoping she'd invite me in, but she only asked if I had watered the garden. Trying to hint, I mentioned the tantalizing smell of her steak, but she ignored it, forcing me to return upstairs, craving meat but having none to cook. Out of desperation, I called Marie, craving steak. At first, she thought I was joking, but when she realized I was serious, she urged me to come over. Knowing Imad wouldn't approve of me going out alone, I suggested she prepare lunch for the next day, despite our strained relationship. The next day, I went to my brother's house and broke the news of my pregnancy. I wanted them to be prepared for anything and made it clear that the doctor warned of a possible premature delivery at 7 months. After 5 months of marriage, my pregnancy was becoming noticeable, but not enough for anyone to suspect I was already 9 months along. Everyone thought I was just 7 months pregnant. My family had prepared a small baby shower, planning to bring the essentials by the weekend. Due to space constraints in our small home, I asked them not to buy too many unnecessary items, thinking I'd buy more once we moved to a bigger place. As time passed, nobody from Imad's family even bothered to congratulate us on the baby essentials we had brought in, mirroring their absence during the dowry's arrival. 2 days later, my mother-in-law barged into our home while I was in the kitchen. I went to greet her, but she ignored me and inspected our bedroom, belittling the commotion we had made over a few baby items. I tried to explain that we hadn't wanted to buy much due to limited space, but she lashed out, suggesting I was making excuses and comparing my current living situation unfavorably to my previous one at my brother's house. Her words were always laced with sarcasm, and not wanting to argue, I stayed silent. As she left, she remarked that Imad had made a poor choice marrying me, despite her advice to consider other more suitable girls. Her words deeply hurt me, and I found solace only in tears, feeling utterly alone in that house, with only my young sister-in-law showing me any kindness. My elder sister-in-law, influenced by outdated notions, had grown colder towards me ever since she learned my child would be a boy. One day, as I was walking in the courtyard, she deliberately started washing the area, splashing water everywhere I went, clearly out of spite. Trying to avoid the wet ground, I slipped when she suddenly yanked the hose, causing me to fall and cry out in pain. Initially, my in-laws thought I was overreacting, but as my condition worsened, they called Imad to take me to the doctor. Later, my young sister-in-law confided that she had seen what happened but had been too scared to speak up. At the clinic, despite my fears, the doctor assured us that the baby and I were fine. However, I knew our home was no longer safe, especially for my unborn child. I became more isolated as my sister-in-law's family began visiting more frequently, which I didn't mind much, given everything else going on. Just days before my due date, my mother-in-law left for Paris to visit one of her sons, providing me with a brief respite. I was relieved and hoped she wouldn't return until after my child was born. I planned to go to my brother's house for the delivery, looking forward to a peaceful environment to welcome my child. However, just as I was about to leave, news came that one of my sisters-in-law would be attending a course in Paris and wouldn't return for a while, extending my mother-in-law's stay abroad. After a few days had passed since my return from my brother's house, none of Imad's family had even bothered to come by or offer a simple congratulation, much like when they ignored the arrival of my dowry. 2 days later, my mother-in-law entered our home unannounced while I was in the kitchen. I went to greet her, but she ignored me and went straight to the bedroom to inspect it, disparaging the fuss made over just a few pieces of baby gear. I explained that I hadn't wanted my family to buy too much due to the lack of space, but she retorted with sarcasm, comparing my current living situation to my previous one and insinuating I was living in luxury before. Her words were always filled with hidden jabs, and I didn't want to engage in an argument with her, so I remained silent. As she left, she made a cutting remark about how Imad had made a poor choice in marrying me, despite her suggestions to consider other girls. Her words deeply hurt me, and I found solace in tears, feeling completely isolated in that house. The only person who was kind to me was my young sister-in-law, but she was too scared of her mother to spend much time with me. My elder sister-in-law, who had initially been indifferent, became openly hostile after learning my baby was a boy. One day, while trying to enjoy some fresh air in the courtyard, my sister-in-law deliberately started cleaning around me, splashing water my way in an apparent act of spite. When I tried to leave, she yanked the hose, causing me to slip and fall, landing hard on my stomach. I cried out in pain, and initially, my in-laws thought I was overreacting, but as my condition worsened, they realized the seriousness and called Ahmad to take me to the doctor. After the incident, my young sister-in-law confided that she had witnessed what happened but was too afraid to speak up. At the clinic, despite my fears, the doctor confirmed that the baby and I were fine. However, I knew I was no longer safe in that house, especially for my unborn child. Days later, my mother-in-law returned from her trip, seemingly oblivious to the name we had chosen for my son, Fayum, and suggested looking for a new name, claiming the one we had chosen was unsuitable. I stood my ground this time, insisting they use the name we had chosen. Ahmad's behavior had changed drastically. He was constantly on his phone, coming home late, and whenever I questioned his late returns, he would claim he had clients. When Fayum was about a month old, one restless night led me to discover Ahmad's sister leaving his car and heading towards our house, raising suspicions and leaving me distraught over Ahmad's fidelity and the implications for our marriage. He was like, "What's up? Got into it with my mom again? Can't you keep your mouth shut?" I told him, "No, it's your shamelessness that's upsetting me." Ahmad, getting angry, was like, "Watch your mouth. I'm doing all this work because of you, and then I come home to your cold attitude and sharp words." I shot back, "You're really going out of your way, but maybe you should just admit you're out chasing other women, including your brother's sister-in-law." His eyes widened at my accusation, and he was like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I saw it myself. You parked your car down the street." She got out and came towards the house. He tried to brush it off, saying, "I didn't do anything wrong. I just gave her a ride. It was late, so I brought her with me. Why are you making a fuss?" No matter what I said, Ahmad wouldn't admit to anything, always denying and telling me not to accuse him without proof. Even though it was clear as day to me that Ahmad was involved with her, I couldn't prove it and had to stay quiet for the time being. Then, one day, my brother and his wife came over unexpectedly, bringing lots of gifts for me and Fayum. That day, Emily mentioned that Jack had proposed to Mary and they were planning to get engaged soon. It was probably the best news I'd heard in a long time. I was so happy for Mary because Jack was a real man. 3 weeks later, it was Mary and Jack's engagement party, and I spent the morning at my brother's place. Jack adored Fayum and really liked him. Seeing Mary happy and feeling content next to him made me forget my own sorrows, though sometimes I'd question why my fate turned out the way it did. With a little one, it was hard to go to the salon, so I did my hair at home. When I tried calling Ahmad in the evening, he didn't answer, and he still didn't pick up after several tries. It was past 9 p.m., and all the guests had arrived, but there was no sign of Ahmad. Everyone was asking about him, and I didn't know what to tell them. I was embarrassed, feeling like everyone could tell I wasn't happy. Towards the end of the party, Ahmad finally showed up. I was furious with him. He just sat down in a corner like a stranger, not even bothering to offer a simple congratulation to Jack and Mary. A few minutes later, he signaled for us to leave. To save face in front of everyone, I said he was tired and not feeling well, and got ready to leave with him. We didn't speak on the way home, but when we arrived, I demanded an explanation for his lateness. He arrogantly claimed he had work, as if nothing was wrong. I was sure he had been with his sister-in-law. I lashed out at him, and when I mentioned her name, he turned violent and started hitting me. With all the noise I was making and Fayum crying, my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law came upstairs. My sister-in-law was holding Fayum, trying to take him away, but I stood up, snatched him back, and yelled, "God won't forgive you and your sister for ruining my life." Ahmad was shouting for me to shut up, and when my mother-in-law, who had just grasped what was happening, asked what was going on, I blurted out that this woman and her sister were trying to wreck my life. Her sister has become Ahmad's buddy, God knows what they're up to, she's always around our house, and this woman is backing them up. My mother-in-law was stunned, seemingly unable to believe what I was saying. In response, my sister-in-law grabbed my hair from behind, threw me to the ground, clawed at my face, and hissed that I should watch my mouth. accusing me of making up stories ever since I found out Ahmad wanted to marry her before me. My mother-in-law, convinced by my sister-in-law's words, laid down the law that night, telling me to drop the subject for good. After that night, I decided to keep my distance from Ahmad. It's tough for a woman, but I swallowed a lot and kept quiet until 6 months later. Mary and Jack got married, but Ahmad didn't even show up for my sister's wedding. By then, it didn't matter to me, and my family had somewhat realized I was having issues with Ahmad. Fayum was nearly a year old, bringing smiles to everyone's faces with his sweet antics, and my mother-in-law adored him. However, my sister-in-law couldn't stand him. I was scared of her and very protective of Fayum. For a while, I noticed changes in Ahmad's financial situation. He'd changed his car for a newer model and often came home late, sometimes disappearing for days without a word. One night, when I was alone, around 2 a.m., Ahmad came in with 2 bags. I had a bad feeling and asked him what they were. He said it was stock for the shop and he'd take it in the morning, telling me to go to sleep. My mind was racing, and curiosity kept me awake. Ahmad seemed scared too, unable to sleep, constantly staring at the ceiling. Early in the morning, Fayum's cries woke me. As I was feeding him, Ahmad got up to go to the bathroom. I quickly went to the bags, and when I opened them, they were filled with white packets. I was shocked, unable to believe they were full of drugs. Scared, I confronted Ahmad as he came out, throwing the bags at him, accusing him of smuggling. He started cursing, asking who gave me the right to touch the bags. We fought. Fayum was terrified and crying. Because of the kicks Ahmad had given me, I could hardly walk. Despite everything, I held Fayum close, determined to leave that house for good. I grabbed Fayum's bag, but Ahmad wouldn't let me go and locked the door, scared I'd rat him out. But I couldn't stand it anymore. I was determined to leave. I opened the window to escape when Ahmad attacked me like a madman, snatched Fayum from my arms, and couldn't hold him properly. The baby fell and hit his head. I quickly picked him up. He was crying a lot, and his head was swelling. I tried to calm him by feeding him, but he was pale and ended up throwing up everything he had eaten. I begged Ahmad to take him to the doctor, but he insisted the baby would be fine and left with the bags. I felt utterly alone in that house. I called my brother, crying, telling him Fayum wasn't well and we needed to take him to the doctor. It took about an hour for him to arrive. Fayum was lethargic and barely opening his eyes. The pediatrician immediately ordered him to be hospitalized and to have a scan. After they admitted him, I was asked to leave the room. 3 hours later, the pediatrician called my brother in. I was anxious, and when my brother came out, his face was wet with tears. I screamed, asking what had happened. He hugged me and said, Fayum had a brain hemorrhage, and we've lost him forever. My brother was crying, and I was just screaming in disbelief, saying someone tell me it's a lie. My world had ended. I had endured so much just for Fayum, and now I had lost him so easily. I had gone mad, and my brother was in no better shape. He barely managed to get me home from the hospital. I had screamed so much I had no voice left. Soon everyone knew, and my brother's house was crowded. I didn't want to see anyone from Ahmad's family, and I sent a message saying they weren't allowed to come. But my mother-in-law, my elder sister-in-law, and my sister-in-law came anyway. Instead of condolences, they started disrespecting me in front of everyone, saying my negligence caused their grandson's death. My sister Mary, who was 2 months pregnant and not feeling well, saw that Ahmad's family was not respecting anything and kicked them out. At that moment, I only wanted Ahmad dead. I wished I could strangle him with my own hands. He was the murderer of my child. On the day of Fayum's funeral, I didn't speak to Ahmad's family at all. They all blamed me for Fayum's death, and my elder sister-in-law said it was a pity that such a boy had a mother like me. Her words were out of jealousy, otherwise, she never liked my son. Ahmad was very good at pretending, acting as if he was a grieving father at Fayum's grave, convincing everyone that he was a model father now suffering from his son's loss. His sister-in-law was by his side the whole time, trying to comfort him. I couldn't stand that family anymore, and a few days after Fayum's death, my brother said he wouldn't let me go back and that I should get a divorce. I was so filled with hatred for Ahmad that I wanted to take revenge and told my brother I wanted to go back and this time turn Ahmad in for the drugs. But my brother strongly opposed it, saying to leave it to God to deal with them. No one knew about my past, and for the sake of my family's honor, I backed down again. I went with my brother to file for divorce and quickly went to my place to pack up my things and leave there forever. Only my younger sister-in-law came to say goodbye and told me she was glad I was leaving. Ahmad and his family didn't deserve me or mine. I permanently left Ahmad's life, and for a long time after the divorce, I was depressed and withdrawn, not wanting to deal with anyone. Many nights, I would hold Fayum's clothes and toys and sleep with them. Life had no meaning to me anymore, but with my family's support, I started to get better. Mary insisted, so I went back to my music classes, and after 6 months, I began to regain control of myself, thinking life was starting to show me its peaceful side again, not knowing fate had bigger plans for me. Sometimes I worried about Ahmad, why there was no news from him, but I couldn't check on him. My life at my brother's house was peaceful, and with his support, I finished my music classes and enrolled in a laboratory science program. For years passed since all those events, and during that time, Mary had a boy and a girl, keeping her busy with parenting. Thankfully, she had a great life with Jack, and I enjoyed spending time with my niece and nephew, which helped me forget my bitter past. I had a few suitors during that time, but since I had no intention of remarrying, I turned them all down. Mary's son was 4, and her daughter was 2.5. Mary worked, and when she was at work, the kids went to daycare. Sometimes, when I was home, I'd pick them up and bring them to stay with me. One day, when the kids were with me, I called Mary and suggested making dinner for them to come over. That night, Jack mentioned a few days' trip they were planning and insisted I come along. I wanted to go, but when I found out Jack's mother and sister were also coming, I declined because I didn't like Jack's mother. She was a very proud and snobbish woman who thought too highly of herself. Thankfully, Emily was nothing like her mother, and eventually, Mary, along with Jack's family, left for the trip in 2 cars. Before they left, I hugged Mary, asked her to pray for me a lot, and kissed the kids goodbye. I didn't want to let them go. I felt uneasy the entire time they were traveling and kept in touch with Mary, asking about their welfare. The day they left was nearing dusk when I called her, and she said they'd arrive in about 3 hours, planning to come straight to my brother's house. I helped Emily with all the preparations, but my heart was racing, and I kept looking at the clock every few minutes. It was around 9 p.m. when my brother's phone rang. After he answered, he said he'd be back soon. I had a bad feeling about that call. I asked who it was, and my brother, visibly upset, said it was nothing. I pressed him, and he reluctantly shared that the hospital had called Jack had been in an accident. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream and asked about their condition. My brother said he'd let me know and left. I couldn't stand waiting, so I insisted on going with him. Despite his efforts to stop me, we left under the guise of needing to shop. In the car, I realized the accident happened near my old house. We quickly arrived at the hospital. Emily's sister, her father, and my nephew were in the ER with minor injuries, but Mary and Jack were in bad shape, and Emily's mother had a broken arm. Mary's daughter had a cracked skull and was being stitched up. Everyone was scared and crying. I comforted the kids and asked Emily's sister what happened. She explained that Mary, Jack, and their daughter were in Jack's car when they collided with a speeding truck while turning. They were following and got less damaged. It took about an hour before we could speak to the doctor, who informed us that both Mary and Jack were in a coma, with Mary's physical condition being worse. Hearing this, I broke down, uncontrollably reminded of the day I lost Fayum. I realized my unease wasn't unfounded. I cried all night in the hospital. After 3 days, Emily's mother was discharged, but Jack and Mary remained comatose. The family prayed for their recovery. The kids missed their parents terribly. It was a challenging time for all of us. 12 days post-accident, Jack regained consciousness, thankfully with no serious issues besides some fractures. My worry for Mary grew. I visited the hospital daily, watching her through the glass. After losing our parents, my sisters and I had grown incredibly close, and seeing Mary unconscious was unbearable. Jack was discharged after 6 days but became irritable and prone to shouting at the slightest provocation. On the 28th day after the accident, the hospital called my brother early in the morning to announce Mary had awakened. Overjoyed, I prepared quickly, and we headed to the hospital, though we had to wait to see her doctor for permission to visit. When we finally met the doctor, he confirmed Mary had woken up but regretfully informed us she was paralyzed due to spinal cord damage. Additionally, a head injury had severely weakened her vision, which could potentially lead to complete blindness within 2 months. After the doctor spoke, I didn't grasp anything else. I stumbled a few steps, lost my balance, and fell. When I came to, both my brothers were by my side, their eyes swollen and red. I was on an 4 drip. Recalling the doctor's words, I burst into tears. You might not believe it, but even the emergency nurse cried with me. She said my brother told her how much hardship we siblings had endured. It seemed like my family was never meant to find peace. That day, none of us could visit Mary. Jack's family also learned about her condition. Jack was silent, not saying a word. The next morning, along with Emily and her family, we went to see Mary. She had lost a lot of weight and barely opened her eyes. When I called her name and held her hands, she looked at me and asked why I appeared blurry and why her legs felt so heavy, unable to move them. I said it was due to being unconscious for a while, but she didn't believe me. 2 days later, we had to tell her the truth with her doctor's help. It was hard. Mary was too young to hear that she would never walk again for the rest of her life. After 10 days, we discharged Mary from the hospital. Despite my brother's insistence that they stay with us for a while, they refused. Jack was adamant about taking care of them himself. Jack's family stayed with them for a week before leaving. Mary had completely lost sight in one eye, and her other eye was partially impaired. She was scheduled for surgery to possibly improve her vision. Her personality had changed drastically. She suffered from severe depression and often cried loudly. Caring for a patient in such a condition, along with 2 small children, was incredibly challenging. I tried not to show my exhaustion, but sometimes it was overwhelming. 4 months passed, and Jack did help with chores as much as he could, but Mary's irritability often spoiled everything. I tried to soothe her with more kindness, but it was futile. Sometimes her words hurt me deeply, but I had no choice but to endure. I couldn't leave her alone. One night, her daughter had a fever. After putting her son to bed, Jack and I took her to a clinic. When we returned, Mary was asleep. I gave her daughter the medicine, and she too fell asleep. I was exhausted. Jack was lying on the sofa. I went to take a shower but forgot to grab a towel. The bathroom was in Mary's bedroom. I cracked the door to see if Jack was there so I could grab the towel, but to my surprise, Jack had left a towel for me behind the door and had gone to sleep in his son's room. I made myself a tea comfortably, tidied up a bit, then went to sleep in Mary's room. In the morning, when I brought breakfast for Mary, she threw the tray and yelled at me to get out of her house. Shocked by her reaction, I asked, "Mary, what's wrong? Why are you yelling?" She just shouted back to leave. The kids woke up, scared and crying. Jack had gone to work early, so he wasn't home. I hugged the kids, left the room, but Mary kept screaming. I didn't understand what had happened. I was fed up and couldn't tolerate her insults anymore. I got ready, wanting to take the kids with me, but she wouldn't let me. I had no choice but to leave them behind. Once outside, I called Jack to inform him. Around noon, I texted Jack, who said not to worry, he'd taken the day off and would talk to me in the evening. I felt terrible. I hadn't neglected Mary, and she didn't have the right to treat me this way. My brother and Emily suspected something was off when I returned home, but I had nothing to say. I waited for Jack's call all night, but he never reached out, leaving me sleepless. The next morning, I had class, but as I was leaving, I saw Jack with the kids at the end of the street. I hadn't seen them in a day and missed them terribly. I hugged and kissed them. Jack said he was taking them to daycare and asked me to come along. I skipped my first 2 hours of class to join him. We registered the kids at the daycare, and Jack dropped me off at the university. I expected him to say something during the drive, but he remained silent. As I was about to get out, Jack mentioned he needed to find a caretaker for Mary. I couldn't hold back anymore and asked, "Aren't you going to tell me what happened to Mary?" Jack looked down and said Mary was suspicious of us. I was stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" He replied, "Mary is sick and very sensitive right now. We need to understand her." I felt awful at that moment and couldn't attend my university class. I wandered aimlessly for hours before going home. After that day, I stopped visiting Mary. If I missed the kids, I'd go to their daycare. Jack had hired a caretaker for Mary, but she was difficult to get along with, and they went through 4 caretakers in 3 months. I could tell Jack was exhausted and unhappy with Mary's behavior. Jack's family gradually became aware of their issues. One day, after returning from university, I found out that Jack's parents had come from Paris. They talked to my brother that night, wanting to find a new wife for Jack. I knew this would devastate Mary, as she loved Jack deeply. 3 days later, through Jack's mother, Mary learned of their plans, which shattered her emotionally, leading to a brain stroke that required hospitalization. But my dear Mary couldn't hold on and passed away 3 days later, joining our parents. I was devastated and couldn't bear the loss of my sister. I had a fallout with Emily and her mother, blaming them for Mary's death. Despite Emily's repeated suggestions for me to leave, my brother wouldn't let me, and Jack never intervened in my disputes with his sister and mother. 2 months had passed since Mary's death, and Jack's mother had been taking care of the kids, staying at Jack's place. However, she couldn't stay there forever and was urging Jack to settle his affairs and move to Paris. She agreed to take the children with her to Paris, leaving me feeling even more lost. Many nights, I lay awake, tormented by thoughts of the kids. My relationship with Emily worsened day by day, and I didn't want to be a burden on anyone. I wanted to start an independent life. After finishing my studies, a friend helped me find a job at a hospital. 3 months into my job, a friend mentioned a hospital in Paris looking for new staff. By a stroke of luck, I applied and was accepted after a month. I was thrilled as this meant I could stand on my own 2 feet, even though convincing my brother was tough. But after much persuasion, he agreed, and we moved to Paris. By then, Jack had completed his transfer and was living in Paris. On our arrival, we visited Jack's mother's house. I was longing to see the kids, and despite not wanting to visit Jack's family, I went for the sake of the children and my brother. Jack's mother and sister weren't welcoming, only pretending for my brother's sake, their son-in-law. The next day, after settling my work affairs and being due to start in 2 days, I had time to find a place to live. With Jack and his cousin's help, we found a 45 square meter apartment a couple of streets down from Jack's father's house. My brother had to leave and was going to send my belongings. I couldn't go with him, so reluctantly, I had to stay at Jack's father's house. I would rather have stayed in that empty apartment than go there, but I had no choice. I gave my brother the necessary instructions and he returned to our city the same day. Jack's mother was far from hospitable, her behavior was terrible. She would set the table and call everyone for meals except me. I tried to keep myself busy with the kids during those few days, preferring to go hungry rather than eat from a table set by Jack's mother. I was thrilled about becoming independent, but at Jack and his father's insistence, I ate a few bites reluctantly. At night, she would take the children's beds for herself and sleep in the bedroom, leaving me to sleep on the sofa without a blanket or a mattress, using a cushion as my pillow. On my first day at the hospital, I quickly got acquainted with everyone and liked my work environment. As evening approached and I dreaded returning to Jack's father's house, one of my colleagues noticed my distress. I couldn't bear to share my troubles so soon, so I just said I didn't have a place to stay that night and wished I could stay at the hospital. My colleague was taken aback by my comment and insisted on knowing why I didn't want to go home. I vaguely mentioned a few things, and thankfully, after some coordination, I was allowed to stay on shift that night. Around 8 p.m., Jack called to ask if I was still at work. I told him yes, I was staying the night for a shift. He laughed, thinking I was joking, asking which shift I was on so soon. I said I was covering for a colleague and hung up. At 11 p.m., Jack came to the hospital to make sure I was actually there. He knew why I didn't want to go home but didn't say anything. So, my work essentially began with a 48-hour stay at the hospital. My brother sent my things, and I set up my apartment by myself. That first night I slept in my apartment, I was immensely grateful. Despite Jack's family living nearby, I knew I couldn't expect anything from them. I always reminded myself that I was alone in this city. Whenever I missed the kids, I would ask Jack to bring them to the local park so I could see them. 2 months passed since I arrived in Paris, and during that time, my brother visited once or twice, putting his mind at ease. I had become very close to my colleague Lena, who knew I was alone and would occasionally visit me. Lena had a boyfriend whom I had seen a few times outside the hospital. One afternoon, after our shift ended, Lena mentioned that Joseph, her boyfriend, was coming to pick her up and suggested I join them. Initially, I refused, but after her persistence, I agreed. Joseph wasn't alone, he brought a friend. Sitting in the car with Lena, I immediately regretted my decision. I wasn't someone who would just go out with two strange men. I felt guilty and criticized myself. Lena sensed my discomfort and whispered that I shouldn't worry, assuring me that she knew Joseph and his friend well and that they were trustworthy. Even though I didn't know anyone in Paris, I felt paranoid whenever someone stared at me, fearing they might recognize me. Perhaps it was my light skin and blue eyes that attracted attention, as people would invariably glance at me for a few seconds. At one point, I looked up and saw Joseph's friend staring at me through the rearview mirror, not looking away. I looked down, feeling uneasy. After a short drive, Joseph asked where we should go. Lena, with a laugh, said that since we had two special guests, we should go somewhere nice. Joseph agreed, saying he'd take us somewhere great. We ended up at a beautiful place where Joseph treated us to dinner and hookah. That night, I realized Joseph and his friend were both business partners, owning a few clothing stores. They seemed like decent guys, claiming their wildest ventures were hookah and night parties. After a long time, I genuinely laughed and enjoyed myself with Joseph, his friend, and Lena, losing track of time. When I returned home around midnight, I felt life was about enjoying these moments and appreciated the independence I had, being able to stay out without anyone worrying about me. A few days later, on my day off, Lena called, wanting to discuss something. She arrived with lunch, and after some small talk, she mentioned that Joseph's friend, Andrew, had been asking for my number, wanting to get to know me better since he was quite taken with me. Surprised, I asked, from just one meeting? Lena laughed, saying my blue eyes had done their magic. Andrew wasn't the type to easily take a liking to someone, but he had been pestering her about me. Reluctantly, I agreed to give him my number, and that's how my friendship with Andrew began. Andrew texted me that evening, calling me Miss Ocean Eyes and asking how I was. I was shy and didn't reply immediately. He sent another message, saying I had drowned him in my eyes and was being unkind by not replying, even sending a heart emoji. Feeling it was rude not to respond while online, I replied with a simple hello. He quickly responded, playfully chiding me for finally gracing him with a reply. His behavior was intriguing, something I hadn't experienced before, and I found myself enjoying our conversations. I remember the first time he picked me up from the hospital after work, he brought me a single rose, saying it was with love. No one had ever bought me flowers before. I smelled the rose, thanked him, and he suggested we take a drive in his SUV. I was thrilled but couldn't spot any SUV around. Andrew, realizing this, mentioned he had parked it in the back alley due to lack of space. Following him, I was amused to find he had come in a clunker, not the flashy vehicle I had expected. Despite this, We had a great time cruising around, blasting music that turned heads and brought smiles to onlookers' faces. I found myself chatting and joking with Andrew frequently, telling him he was mine, though initially, I didn't take such comments seriously. Andrew and I quickly grew close, calling each other multiple times a day. He had saved his name as Breath in my phone, a term of endearment I didn't change to avoid upsetting him. I regularly saw Jack and the kids, taking care not to mention Andrew around them. However, one day at the park, after Jack questioned me about the frequent calls from Breath on my phone, I sensed his jealousy. Despite having no obligations to anyone, Jack's reaction made me uneasy, and I lied, saying Breath was a female friend named Nefize. At the hospital, a familiar name appeared on a patient file, sparking my curiosity. Despite thinking it was a coincidence, the patient's age and details led me to investigate further. In the women's ward, I discovered it was indeed my sister-in-law, who was now battling severe cancer. Seeing her in such a state, with her appearance drastically altered, was a shock. Although we had our differences, witnessing her vulnerability made me forget the past grievances. I approached her, offering a simple greeting, which moved her to tears. Despite her inability to respond, I felt a deep sympathy for her condition, putting our past conflicts aside. I told her I hoped she gets better soon and left the room, feeling awful. Memories of the past and the hardships I had endured haunted me. A nurse mentioned she was a relative, but I denied it. She said the patient's condition was terminal, likely not lasting more than 24 hours. I didn't respond and returned to the lab. After a few hours, the ward called, saying the patient and her companion were asking for me. When I went up, my younger sister-in-law confronted me, wanting to talk on her sister's behalf but warned me of her imminent death. She said everyone pays for their wrongdoings in this world, implying this was her sister's retribution for her actions towards me and others. I said I wished no one's death, but she knew how I was treated by everyone except her. She revealed that their mother had suffered a stroke and became bedridden, eventually passing away after 5 months due to neglect from her daughters who grew tired of caring for her. I shared how deeply Amir had wronged me, which surprised her. She demanded oaths before believing my story of being Amir's wife and the ordeal he put me through. Returning to my sister-in-law's side, I held her hand, encouraging her to stay strong, though a bitter smile on her face suggested she knew her end was near. That night, I stayed late with my sisters-in-law, my phone battery dead and the charger at home. I informed Andrew I'd be home late and my phone might die. Around 11, I reached my building and found Jack waiting in his car. As I approached, he struck me and left. I ran after him, demanding to know what he knew about the past. Jack angrily accused me of manipulating Amir into marriage because of an unintended pregnancy, claiming Amir had wanted someone else but was forced to marry me due to my insistence. He believed the baby's early birth confirmed his suspicions about my character, blaming me for ruining both our lives. I was too upset to listen and left, shocked by Amir's twisted version of events. After calming down, I checked my phone, ignoring messages from Andrew, and took a painkiller to sleep. The next morning, Andrew called, worried because I hadn't responded to his messages. At the hospital, I remembered my sister-in-law and went to check on her, only to find her bed empty. A nurse informed me she had been moved to intensive care overnight. While walking in the corridor, I encountered Amir's brother and my younger sister-in-law. Despite the awkwardness, I confronted Amir's brother with the truth about his actions. My sister-in-law, surprised by my outburst, asked what had happened. I explained the situation, including Jack's accusations. In the afternoon, I was paged and found my sister-in-law waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She announced her sister's passing and her intent to take the body back to their hometown. She asked for my forgiveness on her sister's behalf, acknowledging the harm she had caused me. I assured her I had already forgiven her sister, but not Amir. She was curious about my distress and, upon hearing the full story, was appalled by Amir's lies to Jack. After hearing about my sister-in-law's death and her sister leaving, I lost the will to work. I called Andrew to pick me up for an outing, taking a break from work. With Andrew, I felt uplifted, his attention to my happiness making me forget my sorrows. He hinted at a future together, but I didn't respond directly. Despite enjoying the day, I avoided letting him drop me off at home, fearing Jack might see us. Andrew, sensing my hesitance, asked why I hid my feelings and expressed his interest in a deeper relationship. I was taken aback and explained our different circumstances, doubting his family's approval due to my past. Andrew insisted that my past didn't matter to him and that he was capable of making his own life decisions. He then presented me with a ring he had intended to give me on my birthday, urging me to accept it if I had feelings for him. Conflicted, I took the ring. He looked at me and said, "Bring me a glass of water." After he drank the water, he blurted out, "You have to become my wife." I was stunned, sat on the couch, and asked, "Are you okay? Do you even realize what you're saying?" He replied, "I want you to marry me. I'm tired." Tonight, they wanted to take me for an arranged marriage proposal, but I refused and ruined everything. I had a fight with my mom. I can't trust my kids with someone I don't know. I want you to be my wife because I know you, and I've loved you before you became Emad's wife. After your marriage, you were no more than a sister-in-law to me, nothing more, nothing less, because I was happy with Mari and our life lacked nothing. But fate had other plans and took her away too soon. We've both suffered enough and understand the pain of losing loved ones. You're the only one I trust to take care of my kids, knowing you won't harm them. I know you love Mari and care deeply for the kids, and wouldn't want Mari's spirit to be troubled seeing her kids raised by strangers." All the while Jack was speaking, my phone was in my hand, and I was glancing at the chat screen with messages from Andrew, just reading, not responding. Jack noticed my distraction and asked, "Are you even listening?" Suddenly scared, I set my phone aside and said, "I need to think about this." That night, Jack's words really shook me. I didn't know what to do, stuck between a rock and a hard place. The next morning, like every other day, Andrew's call woke me up. He spoke sweetly, as usual, inviting me for dinner with Lena and David at a friend's birthday party. I asked where it was, and he said at a friend's house. I told him I didn't know them and preferred he went alone, but he insisted. I spent the day at the hospital until 6, rushed home, showered, got ready, and went with Andrew to the party. It was a friendly gathering, and we had a great time. Andrew was moderate in his eating, a trait I admired. That night, whenever someone asked about our relationship, he said we were planning to get engaged soon, which left me feeling tumultuous and unfocused at work, receiving messages from both Jack and Andrew. Lena noticed my troubled state, but no matter how much she pressed, I kept silent. Faced with a tough choice, that same evening Jack called to say his son was unwell, possibly with appendicitis, and needed immediate tests at the clinic. I somehow made it to the hospital, and that same night they operated on his appendix. I was a wreck until he came out of surgery, feeling like I'd died and come back to life. When he woke up, he was restless and kept asking for his mom. I just stood there, crying, and that's when I decided to let go of my love for Andrew and become Jack's wife. Even though a part of my heart loved Andrew, that love was forbidden because of my niece and nephew. Jack's mother, when she came to see her grandson, kept doting on him and scolded Jack for not thinking about the kids needing a mother to care for them. Jack would just say, "Yes, Mom, we'll talk about it later." It took a few days for my nephew to get a bit better, and during those visits, Jack's mother would bring up the topic of him finding a wife and say she'd tie him down and find a good girl for him soon. Because of my decision, I tried to keep my distance from Andrew, replying to his messages late or making up excuses to cut the call short. I wanted him to lose interest and move on. One night, Jack messaged me, asking if I'd made up my mind about him. I replied, "Yes, I have no objections." Jack immediately responded, saying he loved me and promised to make me happy. The next day at work, Lena told me they had planned a birthday party for Andrew and asked me to leave an hour early as David would pick us up. I didn't know how to respond, no one knew about my decision yet. I thought I'd wait until after the birthday to tell Andrew, not wanting to ruin his day. I told Lena I hadn't bought anything for him and didn't know what to get. Lena laughed and said, "You yourself are the best gift for him, don't overthink it, you know how much he loves you." I remained silent. During my time with Andrew, he had been very considerate, always finding reasons to buy me gifts. I wanted to get him a nice gift, and a gold coin seemed like the best option. After work, I bought a gold coin for him, and that night Andrew formally invited me to the party. Since we planned to go straight from the hospital, I brought my makeup and clothes with me. Lena and I took an hour off work, got ready there, and then David picked us up and we went to the party. In the car, Jack called and asked where I was. I told him I was busy and couldn't meet him because I was attending a coworker's birthday party. He suddenly yelled, asking whose birthday it was and why I was going without his permission, questioning my judgment. I was in David's car and couldn't respond properly. His behavior was incomprehensible to me. I hung up and put my phone on silent. Jack kept calling, but I didn't answer. I was so upset that when we arrived, I excused myself to use the restroom and called Jack back. As soon as he picked up, he started complaining, saying he was waiting at the hospital to take me. I asked what his behavior was supposed to mean, and he just kept shouting, wanting to know whose birthday it was and insisting on coming. Arguing with him was pointless. I shouted back, making it clear I wasn't a child or naive enough to need his company and supervision. I told him the party was for women only and warned him not to make me regret my decision to be with him. Then I hung up, my nerves completely frayed by his actions. I couldn't believe this was the same Jack I knew. His behavior had changed, and it seemed like he didn't trust me anymore. I took a few minutes to calm down before Andrew called, asking if everything was okay. I assured him I was on my way. That night, about 25 people gathered for Andrew's birthday, and his friends had really gone all out. After dinner and cake, it was time for gifts. I was the last to give mine, a small box that I handed to Andrew, jokingly wishing him a happy 12th birthday. His eyes lit up as he opened it, and everyone cheered. Andrew thanked me profusely and then announced he had great news to share. He pulled out a ring and declared his engagement to his love in front of everyone, mentioning that preliminary agreements with his family were done and that we would all be invited to the wedding soon. I was speechless, as if struck mute. Lena quickly hugged and congratulated me, assuring me of happiness with Andrew. I wanted to shout out my love for him but also confess that I couldn't be his wife. Yet, I remained silent, not wanting to ruin his night. When Andrew tried to put the ring on my finger, I refused, suggesting we wait until everything was official. That night, I felt so miserable that I wished I could go to Mari's grave to cry and ask why she left, putting me in such a difficult position in life. When I got home, I finally checked my phone and saw about 30 messages from Jack, all urging me to call him for something urgent. I assumed he wanted to question me again about the birthday party and decided to ignore it. I took a couple of painkillers and went to sleep. The next morning, I was awakened by the doorbell. Fearing it might be Jack, I hesitated to open the door but peeked out the window to see Jack's mother standing there. Worried something might have happened to the kids, I quickly opened the door and waited for her at the apartment entrance. I greeted her, but she ignored my greeting and stormed into my house with her shoes still on. She searched around my place, which puzzled me. I asked if something had happened to the kids, to which she sternly told me to stay away from her son's life, accusing me of scheming to win Jack's heart by moving close to their home. She suggested that if I had been a good wife or mother, I wouldn't have been divorced or lost my child. She demanded I call Jack immediately to tell him to take the kids and go back home, or else I'd see the consequences. I was shocked by her accusations. Her face was red with anger, waiting for any excuse to lash out at me. Despite my intense dislike for her, I kept my composure, brought her a glass of water, and calmly told her I had no idea what was going on. I explained that I didn't know where Jack was and that her accusations were news to me. I asked her to explain what had happened. Jack's mother didn't believe me, dismissing my words and warning me not to act innocent. She said she'd never allowed Jack to end up with me and left abruptly without saying goodbye. I was so upset that I couldn't bring myself to go to work, so I called Lena to say I wouldn't make it. Then I tried calling Jack, but he kept rejecting my calls, perhaps out of spite. After numerous attempts, I texted him, asking about his and the kids' whereabouts and why he was ignoring my calls. He didn't respond until I sent another message, pleading for the sake of the kids. He finally replied, telling me to focus on my party life as it seemed more important to me than his kids, implying that I should enjoy my life with my real family. I texted Jack, warning him not to push me to the point where I'd leave and he wouldn't be able to find me, urging him to respond. He quickly called back, clearly agitated. I had to compromise and asked where he was so we could talk. He said he had left home and was looking for a place to stay independently. After some persuasion, he gave me the address of a friend's villa where he was staying. I quickly got ready, took a taxi, and went there. The kids ran to me as soon as they saw me, and I hugged and kissed them, happy to see me, but Jack was cold and distant. I tried to engage the kids and then approached Jack, criticizing his immature behavior despite his education. Jack argued that he had given up his family for me but accused me of being selfish. I mentioned his mother's disapproval of our marriage and her harsh words and threats that morning, questioning the viability of our future together without his family's approval. Jack insisted that with or without their consent, we could marry and that our private life was none of their business, expecting his mother to eventually accept the situation. Despite my efforts, I couldn't convince Jack to reconsider. He was adamant about getting married by the end of the week, planning to rent a place near my work to distance ourselves from his family. I reluctantly agreed without further argument. After leaving, I called Andrew to meet that afternoon, intending to give him my final answer and return the engagement ring he had given me. Andrew arrived before me, holding a bouquet of roses, greeting me with a smile and presenting the flowers with love. Feeling guilty, I knew his kindness didn't deserve the response I had to give. Andrew was visibly happy, boasting about how I had made him proud in front of everyone the previous night, asserting his value to me. Ashamed, I lowered my head, acknowledging Andrew's goodness and expressing my gratitude for his kindness during our acquaintance, stating that the previous night's gift was insignificant compared to his actions for me. Caught off guard by my formal tone, Andrew laughed off the seriousness, but his smile faded when I pulled out the ring and placed it in front of him, explaining that due to my issues, I couldn't accept his marriage proposal. Andrew assured me he had resolved most of his family's objections and urged me not to worry. I clarified that my refusal wasn't because of his family. If they objected, I would understand their reasons. Andrew, visibly frustrated, asked for clarity on what had suddenly changed my mind. Unable to lie, I shared the entire situation with Jack and asked Andrew to forget about me. He just looked at me, silent. I quietly said goodbye and left, feeling terrible and crying loudly, hoping it would bring some relief. That weekend, Jack and I, along with the kids and 2 of his colleagues, went to register our marriage quietly. We exchanged rings that Jack had bought for the occasion. The next day at work, Lena informed me that Andrew was waiting in the hospital courtyard, aware of my marriage through David. Despite feeling embarrassed, I knew avoiding him would be worse. I found Andrew sitting on a bench. Greeting him, I noticed he couldn't even look at me. He murmured a reply, congratulating me and handing over a wedding gift before leaving without another word. Curious, I opened the box he gave me to find another gift-wrapped box inside. Inside the second box, I found the gold coin I had given him and our engagement ring, along with a letter. The letter expressed his initial intention to multiply the gold coin for our wedding, but since I had overlooked his love, he returned it as my wedding gift. The ring, intended for me, was something he couldn't keep or give to anyone else, so he asked me to accept it as a small token of the good memories we shared, wishing me farewell. This gesture from Andrew highlighted the depth of his feelings and the pain of the situation, leaving a lasting impression of what could have been and the emotional complexity of the choices made. Reading Andrew's letter brought tears to my eyes. I loved Andrew and, like him, I knew I could never forget him. But I felt powerless against the fate that had been sealed for me. 2 days later, Jack called to inform me that he had found a house just a couple of blocks away from the hospital and instructed me to start packing for the move. When I mentioned that his mother had called me several times but I hadn't responded, Jack said he had assured her not to worry about him and the kids, omitting the fact that we were married. He advised me to stay quiet until we had moved, after which he would speak to her himself. Within 5 days, I had packed all my belongings, and Jack sent a truck and some workers to transport my stuff. As they were loading the truck, I peeked out the window to check if they had left, only to notice Jack's mother conversing with a neighbor. My heart pounded loudly. I quickly called Jack, who told me not to worry and to simply say I was moving closer to the hospital for convenience, but not to give away the new address. I prayed Jack's mother would leave so I wouldn't have to face her, but 10 minutes later, she came up and confronted me, asking where I was moving in such a hurry and whether my brother was aware of my sudden departure. Shocked by her question, I hadn't even informed my own family about the move. I managed to explain that the distance to the hospital from my current location was too far, necessitating a move closer to the hospital. Jack's mother eyed me skeptically, warning that things would end badly for me if I was lying. After she left, I quickly handed over the keys to the landlord, bid farewell, and headed to the new apartment I hadn't even seen yet. The apartment Jack had rented was a chic 3-bedroom that barely filled with my belongings. Jack promised we could buy whatever I liked to make it feel like home. 3 days into our shared life, I was adjusting, dropping the kids off at daycare as I went to work. One day, as I was leaving the hospital, I felt a sudden tug on my hair and fell to the ground, initially thinking I had fainted or been accidentally pushed. However, when I looked up, I saw Jack's mother standing over me. She pushed me again, causing me to hit the hospital's railings, and then started hitting and verbally abusing me. I was so stunned that I couldn't defend myself, and the scene attracted a crowd of onlookers, adding to my humiliation. The hospital security guard noticed the commotion and recognized me as he approached. He intervened, asking if I was all right and what had happened, providing a brief moment of relief from the distressing situation. Jack's mother continued her tirade as the hospital security took us inside, dispersing the crowd that had gathered. She loudly accused me of stealthily marrying her son and predicted I would just as quietly divorce him and leave. The security guard struggled to calm her down as she claimed I had stolen her son, eventually threatening me before leaving. Distressed, I couldn't even consider picking up the kids from daycare, so I called Lena for help, feeling too ashamed to face anyone. Lena, after discreetly explaining the situation to the security, helped me out of the hospital. Once in the car, I couldn't hold back my tears. Lena advised me without judgment, noting how Andrew truly cared for me and lamenting the heartbreak I caused him. She mentioned Andrew hadn't been home for days due to his distress, making me feel even worse about my decisions. After picking up the kids, we went to her place, where she took care of everything, offering the support of a sister. When Jack saw my distraught state later, he immediately left to confront his mother. I called my brother to inform him of the incident, only to be reprimanded for marrying Jack without consulting anyone. Jack hadn't returned by 11 p.m., leaving me anxious. Around that time, Andrew texted me, expressing concern. Initially hesitant, I eventually reassured him I was fine. Jack returned around midnight, visibly upset, and declared he was now without parents, as his mother refused to accept our marriage and demanded a divorce. I was stunned by her harshness and asked Jack if he was willing to forsake his family for me, questioning the depth of his commitment and the sacrifices we were both making in the face of such adversity. Jack reassured me he would do anything for me, which calmed me down a bit. 2 days after this ordeal, my sister-in-law called, upset about the turmoil my marriage had caused in her own life, leading her to move to Paris. My brother was furious with me for marrying Jack without consulting anyone. The situation was spiraling out of control, with my family in disarray and Jack's mother's actions threatening to ruin my brother's marriage as well. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, I discussed the situation with Jack, who advised me not to intervene, suspecting his mother's intention was to force me to leave him to save my brother's marriage. Following Jack's advice, I stayed out of it, and eventually, my sister-in-law returned for the sake of her children. Jack was often irritable and quick-tempered, but he genuinely cared for me and made efforts to keep me happy. I was growing accustomed to life with him. Occasionally, Andrew would send me messages, simple check-ins, but I knew Jack would be upset if he found out, risking his trust in me. One day at work, Andrew messaged me again, and I told him to stop contacting me, asserting my contentment with my current life. He apologized and then ceased all communication. A year and a half into our marriage, Jack and I were still estranged from his family, except for his uncle and aunt who stayed in touch. I was feeling weak and lethargic for some time, and upon getting tested, I discovered I was pregnant. Jack was overjoyed with the news and became more attentive, fulfilling any craving I had. During my 7th month of pregnancy, Jack's cousin was getting married, and they insisted we attend the celebration. Jack and his cousin were close, and despite my lack of enthusiasm for the event and Jack's apparent reluctance, he insisted we all go together. For the wedding, I bought a light lemon and white maternity dress, and we went as a family. It had been years since I attended a wedding, and I felt no excitement, a sentiment clearly shared by Jack, who seemed to be attending out of obligation. Jack kept reminding me to stay calm and not react to anything I might hear, hinting at his concerns about his mother. Arriving at the wedding venue, it was crowded, but Jack's aunt warmly greeted me. We found a table and sat down, trying to keep to ourselves amidst the bustling atmosphere. Feeling uneasy, I distracted myself with my phone and some fruit. About an hour in, my daughter needed the restroom, and while we were waiting our turn, Jack's mother emerged from one of the stalls, locking eyes with me in a tense moment. She seemed shocked at my pregnant state and didn't acknowledge me, focusing instead on my daughter, who was oblivious to the tension. Returning to our table, I was on edge, fearing another confrontation. Jack's texts kept coming, checking on me, and I reassured him all was well. When my daughter didn't return after a while, I went looking for her and instead ran into Emily, my sister-in-law. Unlike her mother, Emily warmly embraced me, expressing genuine happiness about my pregnancy. Emily insisted I join her table, but I declined, wary of any drama with Jack's mother. Later, Emily and the kids joined me for dinner, and she took my address, promising not to leave me isolated anymore, stating that if Jack and I were happy, it wasn't their place to interfere, choosing to ignore her mother's views. The next day, Emily visited with gifts for me and the kids, spending a full day with us, which brought a lot of joy and normalcy amidst the ongoing family strife. Her support was a comforting reminder that not all ties with Jack's family were lost, and it helped ease some of the tension and isolation I had been feeling. Emily's visit and the support she expressed from Jack's side of the family marked the beginning of a subtle shift in family dynamics. Jack's father even started calling occasionally to check on us, a gesture that indicated a softening of attitudes. As my pregnancy neared its end, sleepless nights became more common, and Jack often stayed up with me, offering comfort and distraction. Despite our discussions about the past, particularly my history with Ahmad, there remained an unspoken tension. Jack never seemed fully convinced by my explanations, but I ceased to press the issue, seeing no point in arguing further. Jack never restricted my movements after marriage, and when it was time for the birth of our son, his father took care of our other children, showing a level of involvement and concern that was unexpected but deeply appreciated. The hospital was bustling with colleagues and friends offering their congratulations, yet the absence of a constant companion during this time left me feeling somewhat isolated. Jack's excitement at becoming a father again was palpable, and he doted on our new son as if experiencing fatherhood for the first time. However, that evening, when he left, a wave of loneliness washed over me. Unexpectedly, Jack's mother visited me in the hospital, bringing flowers and showing a kindness I had never seen in her before. She helped me care for the baby throughout the night, a gesture that moved me deeply and hinted at a possible reconciliation. Her continued presence over the next 10 days at our home was a surprising but welcome change, which even Jack found astonishing. We didn't question this sudden shift, choosing instead to embrace the peace and support it brought to our family. It seems like through time and patience, your relationship with Jack's family, particularly with his mother, has healed and transformed into a supportive and caring bond. It's a testament to the strength and resilience that can emerge from challenging situations. Your journey reflects the importance of forgiveness, understanding, and the willingness to move past previous conflicts to create a harmonious family life. Your contentment with your current life, despite its past complexities and challenges, is inspiring. It shows that happiness and fulfillment can be achieved even after periods of turmoil, and that strong family bonds can be a source of immense support and joy. Lena's marriage to David and her impending motherhood, along with Andrew's engagement, suggest that life has moved forward positively for your friends as well. As for Ahmad and his wife, it's understandable that some chapters from the past may remain closed, allowing you to focus on your present and future happiness. Your story is a reminder that while every life has its difficulties, it's our response to these challenges that defines our path forward. Staying strong and not giving into adversity can lead to a fulfilling and joyful life. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and if you're curious to see where this journey takes us next, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single update. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and kicking, and every like, comment, and share means the world to us. We've got plenty more stories, insights, and surprises coming your way, so stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.